Oops, no. So just as a making sure it's okay with you guys, we're going to record it because one, she's like, in case I say something and then they reference something in the Q&A, then I know what it is I said, because for making her edits. And then for the Q&A, when we talk specifically about her, I'll just send her another part of the lab and then bring her back in. But if you, as long as you guys are okay with me recording it, is that good? Okay. Yep. So Bianca has put a lot of time and effort into this, and she's very excited to show you guys what she has come up with and what she found. And as a reminder, we'll just let her roll through the entire presentation, and then when she's done, we'll kind of just ask her whatever questions or clarifications that we have, and then sign her paperwork. All right.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. Today I'm going to present to you all my thesis study, the prospective investigation of mood changes in highly specialized youth male soccer athletes during the season. Again, just I want to take a minute to, oh, I did the wrong one.
It's on the mouse.
Yep.
There you go.
So again, just want to thank you all for being here and for helping me throughout these past few months. So it's definitely a journey. So this is what we'll be going over for the presentation. And before we begin, just a few key terms that you'll probably hear throughout the presentation. The first one being sports specialization. So what that is just when an athlete decides to participate in one sport at the exclusion of other sports. And then you can get a little bit more deeper down into that and categorize it. The athletes we're dealing with in the study are highly specialized athletes, and those are athletes who play one sport in the exclusion of other sports, but also quit all the other sports they're playing to mainly focus on that one sport, and they play that sport for at least 8 months out of the year. Next is burnout. Burnout is just a physical and mental exhaustion, their loss of desire to play that sport, and also just the loss of sense of accomplishment. Next, stress is just those extrinsic factors that impress or impose on a person's well-being. And then going a little bit more deep into that is competitive stress, and that's just the acute sense of stress that a person will feel after a competitive situation that makes them lower their self-esteem because they don't feel like they met those demands or expectations that were put upon them. And lastly, anxiety. That's an emotion characterized by feeling of tension, worried thoughts, and also feelings like that affected them from an actual event. All right. So in the US, 72% of children participate in an organized sport. Studies have shown that participating in organized sport helps promote a healthy lifestyle, help develop cognitive and physical aspects for kids. And then also it's just fun. It's something that kids enjoy to do. And also research has shown that it helps prevent or combat against national health concerns like obesity and diabetes in young children. In more recent years, sports specialization has really gotten a lot of attention, mostly because coaches and parents feel that if they start their kids in the sport early on, this will almost guarantee them elite status or like a college scholarship to play that sport. So kids are now starting to specialize in sports and as early as 7 years old, especially in sports like baseball, gymnastics, tennis, and in soccer. But from research, we see that positive environment will produce positive outcomes in kids that will help benefit them with stress and anxiety. And studies have shown that sport enjoyment increase self-esteem in children versus just sport participation alone. But with the focus going more into specialization and attaining that elite status, the focus has shifted from having fun and development to now performance and winning. And this added pressure to these kids' daily routines that they're already going through with academic loads and family or their at-home life, now paired with having to compete once a week or practice about 4 times a week at a very high and intense level adds stress and strain to them as well. These things can lead to burnout, injury, isolation from their family and friends, especially if those family and friends don't share that same interest in that sport with players if not properly managed. So previous study has looked at wrestlers, and they looked at post-game stress and found that if a wrestler had fun during their match, they had lower post-game stress regardless of whether or not they won or lost. And then in a study that looked at collegiate athletes, I keep clicking the wrong one. Collegiate athletes scored much lower than their non-athletic counterparts on stress scales. And then in a study that was done in 2021 in high school athletes, just right when COVID-19 started and school and sports were canceled, they saw an increase in anxiety levels, averaging 6.3 on anxiety scales. This gives us a lot of good information on, what these kids are, or these athletes are going through and feeling right now in more recent times, but this doesn't give us longitudinally information of how stress and anxiety can be affecting them throughout the season. So, and additionally, there's no research out there that compares mood scores of athletes to their parents as well. So that was something that would give us a more insight on their home life and how that could be affecting their mood as well. So the purpose of this study is multifold, because understanding how stress and anxiety could affect these highly specialized youth athletes will help clinicians, coaches, and healthcare or parents to better help manage these kids while they're going through these very stressful times. So the first purpose the first thing we aim to do was track changes in stress and anxiety among the highly specialized youth soccer athletes throughout the season. And then second, to determine if of the following factors were associated with athletes' mood levels. So their parents' mood scores, their game results, coaching style, and team cohesion. We hypothesized that if athletes' moods would increase or worsen throughout the season, that athlete and parent scores will be positively correlated, meaning if the child was scoring high, we would see that the parents were also scoring high. And then that game results, team cohesion, and coaching style scores will have an inverse relationship. So if the team was doing really well, their mood scores would be lower. So this was a prospective repeated measures pilot study. We recruited 60 players and parents from an MLS Next Academy team and 7 coaches, 3 of them being their head coaches and the other 4 being considered support staff. So general manager, director, and then a strength and conditioning coach. After consent and ASENT was granted, we ended up with 16 players and 15 parents. And anyone was excluded from the study if they were not literate, were not fluent in Spanish or English, if the athlete was not considered a full-time player, so anyone that was part-time, on loan, or on trial were not included in the study. And then if parent consent or athlete ASENT was not granted. We did have one parent who allowed their child to participate in the study, but they opted out of participating. So that athlete was left into the analyses. He was only excluded in the part where we paired parent and kids to see the relationship between that. So all the surveys were sent via Qualtrics and stored on Qualtrics. We collected basic demographics at baseline, and then 2 different mood scales, the perceived stress scale, 4-item scale, and the generalized anxiety disorder 7-item scale, both really well validated mood scales that look at stress and anxiety in both adults and in children. We also used a differentiated transformational leadership inventory. This consists of 6 subsets that measure leadership characteristics. So individual consideration, motivation, fostering acceptance of group goals, and promoting teamwork, high performance expectations, role model, and contingent reward. We then used a group environment questionnaire to look at team cohesiveness, and this consisted of 4 subsets, and that was individual attraction to group in a social and a task-oriented way, and then group integration in a social and task-oriented way. We also asked the kids to fill out a school questionnaire just to give the insight in what their academic load might look like. And then a very short pressure questionnaire that was on a 4-point Likert scale, just asking them how much pressure they perceived from either their parent or coach. So this is how we distributed this, the surveys. At baseline, we collected, or before we collected all the mood surveys, we asked for consent and assent. And then demographics, PSS4 and GAD7 were collected as well as baseline from all the participants. We asked the athletes to fill out the pressure questionnaire for only their parents at baseline, because at that point we had some kids that were new to the team. And so it wasn't fair to have asked those kids to fill out the questionnaire based on their coaches if they hadn't known them yet or played any games with that team. Throughout the season, we had all the participants fill out 8 mood surveys. These were spread out bi-weekly throughout the season. And then the athletes and coaches both filled out the DTLI, and then the athletes went and filled out the GEQ and the school questionnaire as well. For the same reason, at baseline, the kids weren't in school yet, so it didn't make sense to have them fill out the school questionnaire because they weren't sure what their academic load would look like at that point. And then for the GEQ, kind of the same as what we did with the pressure score or pressure questionnaire, new kids joining the team, and so they were unfamiliar with how the team dynamic would be at baseline. And then at postseason, all the participants filled out the last set of mood scales. And then at this time we asked the athletes to fill out the pressure questionnaire, again, this time for their parents and their coaches. For the mood scores, we ran a repeated measured ANOVA to look at how mood scores varied or changed throughout the season for both the athletes and the parents. To look at the difference between parent and mood scores, we ran a pair t-test, and then to look at parent pressure at baseline versus parent pressure at final, we ran a t-test as well as parent pressure scores final versus coach pressure scores final. And then for game results, we took mood change score and we ran a Pearson correlation to decide the relationship between the two. DTLI and GEQ, we didn't have a big enough sample to be able to compare or run any statistical analyses on that. So we'll look at those results in more of an observational manner. For game result scoring, what we did is we assigned a 1 for every win, 8.5 for every tie, and a 0 for every loss for each individual athlete, and then summed that up to determine their game score, their result assignment. And then for their mood score change, we subtracted midseason from baseline, final from midseason, and then baseline from postseason to find mood change scores for first half, second half, and total season. And then that's the two numbers that we use to run that Pearson correlation. All right. So once we gathered all the information, we had to make some modifications to the analyses. So all athletes were scored, or scores were merged into one single group and not into their respective teams because our sample size was so low. Instead of looking at all 10 time points, we selected 3 time points, the baseline, a mid-season time point at around October, which was roughly the middle of the season, and then the postseason final one. This was just because there was a lot of inconsistency in the amount of responses that we got from participants throughout the entire season. The coaches, only one coach filled out all the surveys, so we didn't have enough data to be able to conduct any analyses on that. So we had to exclude the coaches from the study or from the analyses. And then also GPS data was not consistently collected throughout the season by the team. A lot of that was just due to the fact that they didn't have enough GPSs at the beginning, so not all the kids were wearing them. As for injury, we only had, of the kids who actually consented to participate, 1 kid who actually got injured, which from an athletic trainer point of view is nice, but not from the studies point of view so much. So there was insufficient data to use to be able to run those analyses.
I will say that she did collect analysis from heat and a match cohort, and they did a nice job. So yeah, she does have that. It's just a case study though.
And then for the school questionnaire, once we looked at what the responses that we got, there weren't many responses. And then from what we collected, there wasn't anything that really stood out or was very different amongst the kids. So we decided not to look at those in analysis purposes. So to start, I already spoke the wrong one. Okay, to start these, we're going to look at the athlete and parent mood scores. So changes in mood scores throughout the season were not statistically significant for either the athletes or the parents for either scales. So, but they were, what we did see was that the athlete stress scores increased from baseline to postseason, and they peaked at midseason, whereas the parent stress scores went down. Nonetheless, the kids and the parents both scored their averages for the entire season lower than the normative values, a lot lower than for the kids than for in our sample group. And then we believe this is because, again, we just got kind of through a pandemic, and this is the first time that these kids really got to play in this league at its fullest. Last year, they weren't able to travel outside of Texas to play. This year, they were able to go to a lot of different states in order to play different teams. So that adds that more of an element of fun. If you're 13 to 16-year-old boys and you're able to go on a plane and stay in a hotel with your friends, like that's going to be a lot more fun. And then as for parents, we believe that there was a decrease because once their kids started school, that kind of gave them that, alleviated a little bit of that stress of figuring out what they needed to do with their kids while they were at work. At an added routine to their kids' lives really helps parents. For the GAD-7 or the anxiety measure, we found that the kids decreased throughout the season while the parent anxiety scores stayed relatively the same. It fluctuated a little bit, but didn't really go, but neither of the groups scored higher than the normative values for either groups. And interestingly enough, the athletes from that COVID-19 group, our athletes scored much lower, almost 4 points lower on the GAD than those athletes did on when they filled out the GAD. So what this tells us is that even though, it tells us that sports really help in decreasing anxiety and stress, because both of these normative values for kids, the PSS4 and the GAD-7, are a non-athletic population, and then for the GAD-7, that's an athletic population. And again, going back to just like there was a sense of normality for these kids, they're being able to go back into the sport that they enjoy playing at its normality. However, even though there was no statistical significance, we did see that at every time point, or most of the time points, at least one person, both parent and kid, did score relatively higher than the group overall, or than the average is shown. Even some warranted further conversation about looking into more testing. So that doesn't go to say that just because these averages are lower than normatives, that mental health and stress and anxiety does not exist within this population. So here we're looking at parent baseline when we paired both the kids with their parents. And so this is at baseline, and athletes are going to be in orange and the lowercase letters, whereas the parents are in the blue and the uppercase letters. Here we see that both parents and kids are trending in a positive way, but the parents are more being dragged by anxiety than the kids are. And in this time point, we had one athlete parent pair that had the same anxiety score, and then 4 pairs that had the same stress score. At midseason, this is when we see the parents go down a little bit, or a lot more bit, especially in anxiety, and then the kids are still on that positive trend. And then in this time point, 4 pairs had the same anxiety score of the athlete and parent.
Bianca, can you, I'm still trying to figure out, I'm not familiar with this type of graph. Can you just kind of point out like is that participant 1?
So yeah, so like for instance, participant A is a 1 person, and then their parent would be right here would be a capital A.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And then here we're seeing PSS4 scores, so stress scores at the x-axis, and then anxiety on the y-axis.
Got it. Okay. So for A, they both had the athlete score was lower than the parent score.
Yeah, so here we're seeing that so athletes A's stress score and anxiety score were both lower than their parents' or they had the same, I'm sorry, stress score, but not the same anxiety score, or the other way around.
Other way.
Sorry, other way around. They had the same anxiety score, but not the same stress score, which is why this parent's all the way over here on the.
Okay, got it.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. So, and then at final or at postseason, this is where we saw probably the best athlete parent trend, as we're seeing they're both trending positively, and we don't see an intercept, at least on the graph. And that's more on the negative side, so it shouldn't really exist. And in this time point, we saw that there were three different parent athlete pairs for the anxiety, and then 3 for the stress as well. This just kind of gives us an understanding a little bit of what parent and athletes' mood scores are in relation to each other, but future research probably would be interesting to look at what is going on like in this postseason kind of time point, and to see why both parent and kids are going in a similar fashion. So here we're going to look at athlete perceived pressure score. And again, we only took the parents at baseline because we didn't find it fair to ask kids to fill it out on their head coach at that time because of new players entering the team. But what we did find was that the athletes' parents' pressure had no statistical significance from baseline to final. And then between the coaches, there was also the coaches and the parents, there was also no statistical significance, which would tell us that pressure could be coming from either the parent or the coaches, or not coming from them at all. This Likert scale that I sent out to them, a 0 was none, and a 1 was considered a little pressure. So from the averages we're getting, we got the kids felt only a little pressure from both the coaches and the parents. But if we do look at the range for that final, for that postseason questionnaire, the parents had at least one kid who said none, whereas none of the kids said none. All the kids felt at least a little pressure from their coaches, which makes sense because the coaches are probably they're on a team to win and compete, and it's a high level. But it still gives us a little more insight of what those kids are feeling. We also believe that all these kids had the intentions of coming back to the team, whereas in previous studies, when they looked at burnout, they asked kids retrospectively of how much pressure they felt from their coaches. Here we're asking them, and their intentions were to come back in January and play for the same coach. So there might be a little bit of an element of dishonesty, because they did feel a lot less pressure from their coaches here than in previous studies. So this is our DTLI, what we took. And again, this was what we're looking at more in observational nature, because our sample sizes were too small and we weren't able to compare individual head coaches for the 3 teams. So again, just to remind the 6 subsets, we have motivation, acceptance of group goals, consideration, high performance expectations, role models, and contingent reward. What we found from looking at the averages score for each player is that the support staff scored on average higher than the head coaches did, which makes sense. I personally, working with kids, when you as an athletic trainer, they tend to have a more trusting and open kind of relationship with their support staff, especially healthcare professionals, than they would with their head coach, because their head coach is their purpose is to help them win and perform, whereas support staff is really there to take care of them, whether you're a strength and conditioning coach, an athletic trainer, or like an equipment manager. They're there to take care of them. Support staff 2 scored higher than support staff 1 on average. And that, again, just knowing what support staff 2's role on the team versus support staff 1. Again, he's part of that health and wellness department. So those kids go to him when they need advice on how can I get stronger, how can I do better, and then they just feel more open to opening up to that coach. For the group, for GEQ, the group environmental questionnaire, again, the 4 subsets were attraction to group, task and a group social, and then group integration in a social and task way. And here what we saw is that again, we did this in observational in nature because our sample sizes were low for the kids to look at differences too much. But from what we did see is that the U14, the youngest team, scored higher on average or in total than the two older teams. But then if we look at the individual subsets, they're all somewhat similar. Whereas here for the attention to group task, the U14s and the U17 had similar results, whereas the U15 scored a lot lower for themselves. And why we believe this is because the U15 team had probably the biggest change in roster than the other two teams. And that was because they came off of a really bad year the year before. So that level of cohesiveness and kind of that focus on like, how are we going to be a team changed a lot. And then the kids who stayed probably had that kind of sour taste in their mouth because now it's new kids coming in who are a lot better, and places can be taken from them. I'm always clicking the wrong thing. All right, and then for game results and mood scores, here we did not find any statistical significance between mood scores and game results for any of the time points that we did. However, there is a clinical significance that we can look at and interpret. So in the first half of the season, the kids had a really great record. They had a lot of wins, a couple losses, and no ties. And here we see that they have negative, or that their stress and anxiety scores went down from baseline to mid-season. Whereas in the second half of the season, they won a little bit less, they lost a little bit more, and they tied a lot more. And here we're seeing an increase from mid-season to postseason in their stress and anxiety scores. This could be because of a lot of reasons. The second half of the season, these kids are traveling to tournaments and showcases where they're playing more frequent games back to back. So there can be a level of fatigue that plays into it. But again, these scores aren't very high at all. And that could just be because if you know sports, a game never really represents, or the results doesn't always represent how the game went. You could win a game and feel like you guys played terrible and did not deserve to win, or lose a game and have felt like it was your best performance, or tie and feel like you win the World Cup because you played against a team that you came into as the underdog. So even though there was no statistical significance between the scores and results, it does show that stress and anxiety did have some sort of change between the two halves. So to take home here, high scores were still recorded in the individual level for all time points, even though on average, the scores were similar or lower than the normative values. And athlete and parent scores only saw similar trends at postseason, whereas the rest of the season, they were a little more, they're different. And then we saw that pressure is coming from both parents and coaches, usually just a little bit, but a little bit more coming from the coaches as well. Support staff scored higher than the head coaches on the DTLI, which leads us to believe that the different relationships between a support staff and an athlete and a coach and an athlete exists. The youngest team had the greatest team cohesion, mostly because they're young, and the reasons behind that is they're not really focused on getting that elite status or that college scholarship just yet. They're still 13 years old. They're there to have fun and hang out with their friends. And mood scores, when compared to results, didn't have any statistical significance, but we can look at it in a clinical way and kind of take from that of what, how kids are going to feel based on their performances. We did have some limitations. The first being that we have a very small sample size and very specific sample size, being highly specialized youth male athletes and their parents. So being able to include women teams or girls teams in the future would increase that generalizability. We just didn't have access to those teams for this study. Including coaches and teachers would be a huge positive because teachers as well have so much influence on kids, especially because they spend most of their days at school. So having that kind of insight would be beneficial. And then reducing the amount of times we asked the participants to fill out the survey would increase participant compliance. And that way we could have looked at more time points throughout the season. Collecting GPS data would have been beneficial to have a more objective insight on workload. So like distance covered or minutes played from the athletes. And then comparing that to mood scores to see if there was any relationship or differences there. And then having injury and seeing if injury affected mood score. When an athlete gets injured, no matter what their age, they have to be removed from practices and games. And that can make makes an athlete feel isolated or not feel like they're not helping their team anymore because they're not physically there practicing and playing. So understanding mental health and is a component of early sports specialization is beneficial for parents, coaches, and healthcare providers as well. We should, because even though we found no statistical significance in these changes throughout the season, we did find high scores. And so that doesn't mean that we should discredit what we found. There are still individuals who are scoring high. And so we need to approach how we deal with these athletes in a multidisciplinary fashion and consider how performance, how perceived expectation, and how injuries could affect these individuals. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bianca.
Sorry.
Good job. All right. No, you're good. That was great. Okay, so do you guys have any questions, or I shouldn't say do you have any? Do you want to start off with your questions?
Sure, I have a couple of questions and comments. First of all, great job. You're very prepared, so we all appreciate that. And you were the athletic trainer for this group, is that right?
Their first year, yes.
Okay.
And then my second year as a GA, I got bumped up to the pro team. So helping those kids out on the side, like whenever they needed, or that athletic trainer needed help. But
okay. Oh, so you're working with the pro team?
yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, I think just you have a good, I liked how you interpreted, this is potentially why we got the results that we got. That's always good to think about, especially like you can think specifically about the sample and why. So I think you did a really good job of like interpreting why you think these scores were how they were. So that's always helpful to do. What else? Nice job with the visuals are helpful. So I like that. And I feel like there's someone else I was gonna say good job on, but can't remember right now. I wrote down some questions, but so let me see where I want to start. In your paper, the written part, you mentioned that sport can have a positive impact on stress. That's potentially why some of these athletes had lower stress and anxiety. Can you just explain why, like how might that happen? How might sport help with their coping with stress?
Yeah, I believe that it's just like an outlet, especially in this population. Like I said, I know these kids and I see them, and when they come to soccer, it's just like, that's what they're doing here. They're just playing, and it's usually a sport that they love. I know like all these kids really love playing the sport. So it's kind of that, okay, here I am just playing and having fun and being with my teammates who are also here for like the same goals. So I believe that's why sport participation, especially sport enjoyment, helps decrease stress in anyone, not just kids, I feel like too.
I think it's a specific population where, like you said, they're all there, they have similar goals and they want to be successful and they're really dedicated probably. And so that can help them, that they want to be there and they enjoy it. So that helps to reduce. I think that's a good point. And I wrote some comments. I'll email you both the comments. And I have some more in there, but that's one of the questions I asked. So if you could just, like explain that a little more, I think that would help. Can you go back to the correlation? I think it was a correlation graph with the parents and parents and athletes.
She has 3 of them. Do you care about which one she gets to?
Which is it
So there's
the 3?
baseline,
Okay,
mid,
any of
and then, yeah.
So I saw where you did a t-test also to compare parent.
Yeah.
Right, parent and athlete. And then this is
This
regression.
is just like, this is just like a visualization to see. I feel like it's just easier to see here, especially with like the letters and see like the pairings. Like I showed you, you can easily find like, here's M parent and then like M kids like all the way up there in the corner.
Okay.
About as different as you can get.
Yeah, that's like pretty much.
So, so how would you, I guess, can you just explain the interpretation of that? Like, what would you say about, because the lines are
Like the regression line.
Yeah.
Just to kind of see how individually, like this is showing how the athletes were trending as a group. And then here's this line showing how parents trend as a group. But then you can see again, like here, this parent M had no stress or anxiety at this time point, but their kid scored an 8 on stress and a 9 on anxiety.
Okay.
So it's like seeing, wow, like
Yeah.
these can be very different.
So you can see the individual differences. And then like if you were to look at just the athlete blue line, it's showing a positive relationship between stress and anxiety. Is that how you interpret that?
Yes, because it's going in a positive manner.
And then did you also look at a correlation between the parent score and the kid score?
No, we only ran the t-tests.
Okay, I think that's what I was wondering about. Like, I think it would be interesting if, because you can see there's a lot of differences on there. And I think in the purpose, you go back to your purpose statement.
This one.
Just take it out of that view and then you can click on the side things. Just left, right click, whatever it is, and end show. And then you have to go through the crazy stuff.
I'm gonna close this, but I keep clicking this one instead.
The hypotheses, maybe.
Oh.
Athlete, that's what I was looking at. Athlete and parent scores will be positively correlated.
The wording,
And so I think if you can either modify that to what's in the results, or you can look at the
Analysis.
correlation.
Yeah.
And but that's what I thought that would be interesting because it seems like they might not be correlated at all.
Could I interject here too? I actually, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
I wrote down that I'd like to see that correlation too. That'd be very simple to run. But I just think it'd be very interesting. And it would then match up with what you have in your hypotheses.
Let's see, should I ask? I have a couple more, unless you want to go, Dr. Osborne.
No, I just wanted to reinforce that. I thought that
Okay.
was a point that was worth reinforcing.
Yeah, I think the camera's over there.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we can take a look at that, and then with the change over time, you had a table, where is it? Where you have the baseline, mid, and the 3 different scores with the anxiety and
this one.
yeah. So like I said, I like how you were trying to interpret like why did these scores look like they're going up or down? And even though there's no significant difference, right? But you could also do an effect size. Where Cohen C is one where you do like, you compare the means and divide by the standard deviation. And even if, a lot of times, even if it's not statistically significant, you might have like a medium effect size. And if you have a smaller sample size, that might be why, like there's an effect, like we're seeing a difference, but the sample size is too small to show the significance. So that might also give you some more support to talk about those differences, right? Like if the athletes went from 3.7 to 4, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe it is, and maybe it's a small effect or no effect, or maybe it's a medium effect. Then I think that gives you more, it backs you up when you say, I think this is why the score went up.
Got it.
So that's another idea, you know, just to supplement what you have for that one. And then thanks for reporting all the transformational leadership and group GEQ. I think that stuff's interesting. And one more table, the table about the transformational leadership, DTLI. Typically when I see it, they do, I've seen people average the scores. I know in a lot of the measures that you like the stress, I think stress, and a lot of them you do a sum. But I'm fine with leaving it like this for the thesis, but I think if you want to publish it, it would be helpful to average, like what's the range, 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. If you average the score, so instead of the mean being a 16, it would be somewhere between 1 and 5, or whatever that Likert scale was. And then it'd be easier to compare the different subscales, because it looks like each subscale has a different, oh, that's not the potential range, that's the.
I was gonna say, that is what you're asking for, I'm pretty sure. That's their score for each one of those.
That's your score. I was looking at the range as the potential range, but that's what they did score. Okay.
Yeah.
So does everybody have the same, does each of those, this is my question, does each of those subscales have the same potential range?
Got it.
I was just thinking about, you know, when you're comparing the mean for each of those. But okay, well, that helps answer my question. And
do they have the same potential range? Like, is it from 1 to 30 for all of them? Like, is that the potential range, or are some of them like 1 to 20 and some are 1 to 45? And
they're all 1 to 30.
Okay. When I saw range, I thought that was the potential range, but that's the actual what they scored. So, okay. But yeah, it's interesting just to look at those, and interesting that the support staff seem to be more motivational, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from what I've seen is like the head coaches are there to like put out the game plans, like do the scouting and prepare the kids for the game, whereas like the support staff were there for their athletic trainers were like covering their moves, and you know, the strength and conditioning coach is helping them prevent injuries and helping them with like nutrition and things like that.
Yeah, so I think that'd be interesting to sometimes is that assistant coach, same thing, support staff, assistant coach?
We did not look at any of the assistant coaches just because they changed throughout, which I guess in knowing that we were going to group all the kids together, maybe we could have, but at the time we only wanted to see like kids who had in one team and their head coach, because assistants would like rotate throughout the team. So we wanted to pick people who consistently like interacted with these kids.
Okay. Yeah. So then what did the support staff do? Like I guess if they're not an assistant coach, they're just called support staff.
Yeah, so we selected people who were like the director. So and so there he comes up with like the methodology and like how all the teams are really gonna like follow the style of soccer that they play. The manager, he's the guy who just like is contacting parents, kind of like making sure kids like things get scheduled. And then the strength and conditioning coach as well. So and he's dealing with all the kids at every level and deciding like preventative stuff for as young as the 11s to as old as the 17s. So
Mhm. So do you think, is they're all, well, the support staff looks higher, but they're all pretty, they're all over 100. Do you feel like, this is just your opinion question, the head coaches, would they benefit from like more training on how to be motivational, or do you think it's just the fact that the kids relate to the support staff more?
I think it's just they relate to support staff more. And then like, for instance, the support staff too is probably a little more closer in age than the kids are to the kids, or like the older kids than, or all the kids, I guess too, but like then the head coaches, like they're all older. The head coaches are also from different countries. So there could be also like a language barrier or a cultural barrier between.
Okay.
I mean, these kids nowadays are like, I don't get them, and I'm a lot closer in age to them. So there could be just that also as well, a cultural
Okay.
barrier going on there.
Okay. Yep.
I would say in my experience though, not even in youth, but like in high school sports and college sports and above even pro sports, the head coach is the head coach.
Yeah.
And then the assistant coaches and everybody else, they're usually closer with. Like I've worked with teams where the head coach will never come in the training room. Like they don't want to deal with people if they're hurt. And the assistants are like, oh, you're okay. We love you still. Like they're the really, they're the supportive, lovey-dovey, make sure you're okay kind of people. And the coaches are like, my job is to win.
Yeah.
Your job is to make sure they come to practice and that they do. And you know, they're positional coaches usually, but they still have like a slightly different or closer, I think, relationship with them than their head coaches. And it's not always because the head coaches want it to be that way, but also like it's different. And it's not true for every team either, but
yeah, I think it's just interesting and might be important for the assistant coaches and support. I'm assuming assistant coaches might be like that too, but important for them to know that they can play this important role of, you know, being that motivational person.
Well, I've seen when I was at Penn State, the head coach left and the assistant coach became the head coach. And the assistant coach had been the lovey-dovey, come to the training room and make sure everybody's good and follow up with them all the time. And when she became the head coach, she completely stopped that and became if they're not playing, I don't even want to hear their name. And like started ignoring them. And it was super hard on the girls because they were used to her being like, you know, if I have a problem, I go talk to her and whatever. And she was like, no, I don't have time for that anymore. So figure it out. And then the assistants like had to scramble to figure out how to do that. So it was a really interesting and not very positive transition for at least 1 year.
And if the athletes don't understand like why, you know, why are you changing?
It was rough.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anybody flip quite that fast before. It was like, woof, like she just pulled out a whole new mask, like totally new personality. It was weird.
That's all my main questions. So
Dr. Osborne, what do you got?
Wow, that's great. You dug into a lot of good stuff there. First of all, excellent job. Really nicely done. I'm not sure if you realized when you were getting into it how complicated this was going to be. I think we kind of warned you about it. That you know, you set yourself up for a lot of complexity, but you did a really nice job with it. I wanted to echo that I think it would be really neat to look at the actual correlation between the kid scores and the parent scores. I think there's this general perception that they would be related, but I think it would be interesting and very quick analysis to put that together. And on the graphic where you were showing figure 1, I think it is, if you can bring up figure 1.
It's like opposite.
Keep going, that one.
Yeah. I like this graphic display. I like the way that you put that together. But in the thesis document itself, I think it would be very useful to take the reader through an example of how to interpret the figure.
Okay.
And just like you kind of did when we were asking questions and when you were presenting. So say, pick one like A and say, as you can see from the graphic, and just kind of put it into textual form. And only be like, it would only need to be a paragraph, but that way that the reader can make sure that they're interpreting your graphic correctly.
Okay.
Did I explain that okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it happened during the presentation anyway, so I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point to make
Yeah.
it in the paper as well.
And I just think that's very useful, because this then allows you to present a whole lot of information in one visual way, but you want to make sure your reader gets the full significance out of it by making sure that they know how to kind of follow you through on what the graphic is about.
May I interrupt really quickly? Sorry,
Sure.
I don't mean to throw off your train of thought, but just, and I agree that we should run the correlation. I agree with both of you about that. Do you think, and I'm asking this because I understand that these can be kind of complex to understand anyway, but do you think that it would be, after running the correlation between them, that would it be too much to then include that information on this figure, like if it's statistically significant or not? Do you know what I'm saying? So that way we can show, because if the information's here anyway, and we're already showing how their lines are trending, so we're showing, what they're doing together. So do you think adding like a box or putting on here like no correlation, or do you think that for each time point, or do you think we just need to say that in the text itself and then just leave these as they are currently? I don't want to make it more complicated, but I'm just trying to figure out like where would be the best place to present that additional correlation information that will do. That's
a great question. I actually think a side box here showing the correlation between those two at the 3 time points might just be enough. That would be kind of a nice addition, I think, to
I agree with that, just to report that correlation.
Okay.
Because the graphic sort of teases it out and shows it, but having that as a summary box there, I'm especially hoping that you do find, a significant correlation, at least at one of the time points. I think that would really bring that point home.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that. I just didn't want to like put too much information on here and have them be like, what in the crap are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, how do you see that? and I didn't know if it would be too complex to add to it, because it will be 2 additional analyses, right? 2 additional results, because we'll have the GAD-7 result and then we'll have the PSS4 result on there. So and we can try it and show it, and if you guys are like, nope, that's extra, we need to put it someplace else, and we can sure do that too. I just to get your initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think especially if it, I hate to say it this way, but if it's significant and adds to the understanding, then I would want it to be in there.
Sure.
Rather than just, you'd mentioned before, maybe you could just take that out of your hypotheses. I'm not in favor of that, because I think that it's likely that there are some correlations there. But you don't want to muddle up the graphic if they're non-significant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, conversely, we could also just make another figure. My concern about making additional figures is we already have several tables and we already have several figures. And so most journals have a limit to the number of tables and figures you can have. So we're really pushing like being able to publish in certain journals just based upon the total number that we already have.
Yeah. Personally, I think since the correlations are so relevant to this particular figure, I think including them in a sidebar or something like that would be most appropriate.
Cool. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries at all. And then Dr. Kippen said something about, was it effect sizes and doing the Cohen? I really want to, and I know this is adding another layer of analyses, but it might be something that you seriously consider. Maybe not so much, in terms of getting the thesis document finished, but certainly for publication, that might be very useful, because one of the things I want to do personally me, and I'm not saying that journals would see it the same way, that I personally wanted to applaud you for is the emphasis on clinical significance. I really think that's important, and I don't think that those conversations are maybe had as often as they should have. It's like, okay, it's not statistically significant, so there's nothing to report here. And I think that that she's right, that would really reinforce you to make some of those comments about clinical significance, but have a little bit of data to back it up. So I would encourage you to really consider exploring that, so that you could have a more forceful, if you will, conversation about the clinical significance of some of the things that you're doing.
Okay. Yeah.
And then just a couple of other comments, and this is just sort of a, you know, if you had an opportunity and nothing better to do, you might consider doing. You mentioned looking at stress scores at the beginning at your 3 different time points. I don't know. I've got a couple of thoughts about it, but how do you think those, maybe at least from your reading of the literature, how those stress scores at the beginning of the season compare to like a month before the season or something like that? In other words, is there something unique about the beginning of the season, or is it just because it's the beginning of the season, they're not as stressed yet?
I think it's a very unique situation, especially with this group of kids, because maybe a month before they were finishing up the previous season, they don't have much like off-season time. So it would be interesting to see how it would change rolling in from one to another. But again, I still feel like it would be lower, at least when it comes to like normative values, because these kids get excited to come back. At least I saw them when they came back, and they're excited to be back. There's again new kids who goes both ways. There are new kids who might take a spot from them, but also like new kids that are moving here from different states even. This is a very unique academy where these kids get invited to play on the teams. They're recruited. They don't pay to come and play like other clubs do. So
You had people come from different countries, right?
yeah, we had kids who aren't here anymore, but we had kids from like Peru, the Middle East, who were playing on the team. So it's a very unique situation. So I still feel like it would be low in the case, because they're special in these coaches' eyes, this team, this organization's eyes. So I think that kind of reflects on them too. Like they feel that as well.
You know,
Okay.
I wonder, because I don't believe that we say this, but maybe that's something to emphasize or at least mention because I don't think you've ever said that before in your document or when we've talked. I mean, not that specifically, but potentially that's also a reason why their stress and anxiety scores are low, because if they do emphasize that and the kids do recognize that they are in an elite special situation that they've earned, right? Like they didn't just like pick them up off the street, but they had, saw videos or heard about them, or they won things or did whatever, that they were selected for this. So potentially that leads to some of these scores as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's worth mentioning, but I haven't, I guess, thought about it before, that they know that they're special and maybe they are told like, we want you here and we want you to succeed. So maybe that also helps with some of that too. I don't know.
Yeah, because I found
that
myself.
discussion, like because you've explained a lot of the other results, and the discussion part, you could maybe just add that in.
Yeah, because I think that's also like a double-edged sword too, because they could feel special, but now it's like this, I need to maintain that because someone else can be better and come in and take my, it's like one of those things. And I guess like from looking from what we got is like these kids don't feel that way. Like they're still pretty stressless. I won't say stress-free, but less so than other kids. So, or than the normatives that were collected or compared to.
Yeah, I agree that I think the right place for that is in the discussion, because it could be considered in some ways a limitation, because the scores from these players might be unique compared to other kids of the same age that are participating in at a different level, or not in an academy where they're invited, but where they have to compete to get in. So I think that helps the reader place all of it in the appropriate context. Because I found myself wondering as you were going through there, especially because you started out the presentation talking about the mental and physical benefits, the mental health and physical benefits. Well, so I'm just, like I said, I'm just curious then how these young folks would compare to other young folks who aren't, participating at this, relatively elite level in sport, whether they're uniquely low on these measures compared to other folks in the sport at a different level, or even compared to other people the same age that are not participating in the sport at all.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think it would be important to at least mention that in the discussion, and suggest that would be something that would be worth further study to see if if there are some significant differences between the players at this particular level and this particular type of it. Is academy the right word? Is that what we'd say? Yeah. Compared to other types of academies that maybe are competitive, you got to earn your spot. These folks have kind of already earned their spot, but versus then other 14, 15 or whatever year olds that are not competing in like a formal or specialized sport, something to that effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, I just wanted to applaud you for tackling a very complex project, and to have someone, especially in a thesis, take on a longitudinal type project. That's a big deal, and I really appreciate the thought and effort that you put into it and making your decisions to do that. And I just wanted to commend you for that again.
Thank you. Looking like,
Yeah, which she's looking at your face and
Yeah,
looking at the
sorry.
camera, so she's looking at you. but-
I'm trying to like get you while you talk.
Yeah, it's okay.
Get you while I
I'm
talk.
completely disoriented too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you did a really nice job of, focusing it for this presentation, because I know there's a lot more data that you have, right, collected, but you looked at just the 3 instead of the 10, and not everybody filled out everything, but that's part of the process, right? Making decisions on, okay, how do I take all this and present it? So nice job.
Yeah, I will have to say, it was a very big study.
Yeah.
And there were many lessons that were learned, good and bad. And if you want to share what your future is.
I will be staying with the pro side with the team once I graduate. So I'll be continuing on. And then in 2023, they're thinking about like expanding, having a second like division pro team, and then more academy teams. So there's like a spot for me once that happens.
As an athletic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, as the
Yeah.
athletic trainer. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
so
Awesome.
she found that out a couple weeks ago, so she
Excellent, good for
was
you.
very excited, and she had an offer from another team that wanted to really stay in Austin, and
Mhm.
they liked her so much that they made it happen, which is fabulous and speaks a lot to how clinically sound she is and how much she worked for them, especially lots of extra hours that she technically wasn't supposed to do, but.
I speak French, and they have a French player,
Oh, wow.
or a guy who only speaks French. So they were
Wow.
like, "Yeah, we need help on like
That's
even
awesome.
the
Yeah.
technical side." So as it's pretty unique athletic training.
Yeah,
It's
for
like
sure.
part of video sessions and stuff.
Yeah,
so,
awesome.
Yeah.
But that's what helped her
great.
move up from the academy to the pros, was
Mhm.
because the French guy came over in September.
Yeah, like August,
-ish.
September.
Yeah, I think. And so it's like, oh, you speak French. Come here, kid. Worked out good. So yeah, but yeah, there was a lot about this that was disappointing. We didn't find out about the GPS data until at the end, and they honestly just didn't even collect it. Like a couple were, but she said like most of the coaches didn't even like ever turn it on or hand it out or do anything with it. So we're like, can we just have what you have? And they're like, yeah, we don't really have any.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
We're at the beginning, like I had spoken to like, yes, is that okay? Because I mean, I already have access to all those stuff anyways, but formally got the permission to use it in the study, and they're like, yeah, of course, like we're still gonna collect it. And then
They didn't.
there was a lot of hiccups on that end. So
Yeah. So some of the things that we had hoped to collect, we just were completely out of our control. And so
Yeah. That's a bummer because that could be really interesting information too. I was kind of excited about that, but
yeah.
the
So are we.
The strength and conditioning coach was also excited about it, but again, he was a lot of it because he has like a lot on his plate dealing with like 6 teams. So they tried to like disperse some of his duties as easy as just handing things out and to the coaches, and it just didn't
Happen.
he's very disappointed as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
another thing I wanted to reinforce also how important I think it is that you looked at support staff, not just coaches and parents and players, but also at support staff. And although I don't think there's as much data there as you would have hoped to have had, I think that sets a good standard for people wanting to look at these sorts of issues with players in the future, and recognizing, as was already mentioned, that there's a real difference between how comfortable the players feel or how comfortable even the coach is with them coming to them with issues that are not necessarily sport related. And that if they don't, I would be real curious to think, because I'm guessing that not all teams or academies have as many support staff available for the players. So it would be really interesting to see, and this is just all future stuff here, but interesting to see the relationship between these variables at different points in the season, also as a function of how many support staff are available to these young persons, because they can't necessarily go to the head coach with this stuff, or they might not want to go to their parents with it.
Yeah. And I didn't mention this earlier, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Kipka, this is like your area, but from what I've read in previous research is that they don't really compare head coaches to support staff. It's usually looking at the head coach. Again, possibly because these teams probably don't have all this support staff, because we're mostly like rec teams or college level teams.
Yeah.
Ultimate Frisbee and stuff.
Yeah.
So
there's not a lot of sports staff for Ultimate Frisbee.
And the main reason why I even thought about including the support staff is the coaches, the organization do this thing where they call it like a web, where they ask kids like questions to understand like who their friends are on the team and like who maybe they're not so close with, and how can we improve that relationship. And then they do the same with like the coaches, and they ask, again, it's like a cultural, maybe a barrier, English thing, but they ask like, who on the staff would you be most comfortable talking to? And their expectation is like soccer wise, but the kids don't understand that. And so like there were times where like I was getting filled out and the coaches were just like, okay, yeah, they don't get it. But I was like, hey, I played soccer my whole life. Like
I can talk to him about it.
But like that's kind of like where that idea stemmed out for me, was like, well, obviously these kids feel comfortable with people outside of, besides their coaches, or even the coaches themselves. Like, I'm not a coach, and the kid guy is not a coach, so seeing if that could be a possibility.
Yeah, I just think that's a really nice addition. I think that's something that can certainly be explored more.
She and I spoke about the potential of doing this again this coming year. And I don't know if she's going to do it or not, but my hope would be that because the kids that have already done it would continue to do it, especially for like, you only have to do it once a month instead of twice or more times. And then 2, that more people would join if she did it, because they would see like, the first time you do something, it seems like it's just going to be this huge thing. And it's going to take all this time. And then they find out like, oh, it was like 2 minutes every month. I still have to play soccer, and I still have to go to the meetings, and like that's still my normal. So you're not really asking that much crazy. yeah, I guess I could probably do it. And she even said that there was one kid who filled it out every single time and then would like rub it in other people's faces. So then they would like start doing it more because he was like, no, she's not talking to you. She's only talking to me because I did it. Like, yeah, basically, like they turned it into a competition of who did it the most.
Yeah, that happened a lot too when we were like gathering ASENT from the kids. Like, Bianca, like, I filled out your thing. I'm gonna do it. My mom told me to do it, so I'm gonna do it. And then she's like, what are you talking about? So I'm like, remember your email, Dad? So it was pretty funny, like how they kind of turned it into like a, we're part of the cool gang.
Yeah.
We're doing this, you're not. It's like,
That's
it's-
awesome.
But also, yes, you are the cool gang.
She's gonna have a t-shirt, join the cool gang. Fill it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, because I think every time you do a research study, there's always like, oh, I should have done it this way, or I could have,
Yeah.
Gotten more people by doing this. So and I think from, you got, some people said they were gonna do some things, but didn't. So then if you do it again, you can maybe like more reminders or like, I feel like a lot of times you trust and you hope, you're optimistic that people are gonna do what they said they're gonna do, but a lot of times other stuff gets in the way and it gets pushed back. So.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, interestingly, and you can talk more about it if you want, but throughout the course of this, it has come to light amongst the administration that strangely, stress and anxiety and well-being is actually an important thing that they should care about. And some of them that had even signed up for the study didn't realize like what it was. And so they weren't like the coaches and stuff, I mean, because you had like a team psychologist, right? Come in and start talking about it and they're like, oh, so this actually is important, because people are like, Bianca's actually already, or you said, I'm like already collecting all these things. And they were like, what? That's amazing. And the coaches were like, shit.
It was like a roller coaster with the coaches. Like when I first presented it to them, like the idea and like asking them if A, I could do it, and B, like if they would want to be in it. They were like, oh yeah, this sounds great. Like this sounds important. Like we should do it. And then like none of them responded. So I was like, cool. But throughout the season, the academy brought in like a guy who specialized in like organization and like team building, things like that from UT. And I like was with the first team at this time, and I was just helping out one day, and I went into the classroom to do schoolwork before practice, and I walked in and everyone was in there having this meeting, and I was like, I guess I'm joining this. But I get the memo about this. And so we're talking about it. And one of the other coaches who's for the younger team, they kind of tasked him that season to do like a mental health thing too. And he was like, knew about it by study, but wasn't asked to participate because his team wasn't part of the group. I was like, Bianca, are you like doing this? So he kind of was like, Bianca's like doing all this. And then the guy was like, what? Like, yeah, like I actually am like looking at this, and this. And he was like, and like brought up the detail I and like the DQ, and he was like, you guys are already like really on top of it. And I was like, no, not you guys. Me.
No. All of these people didn't do it.
And so I think like the coaches were like, oh, yeah, okay, we need to like, but then they still ended up with my forms. They would decide to do their own thing.
They do some like team building interventions.
Yeah, stuff like with like the coaches and staff. Cool. So, yeah.
But I think that leads to, if you figure out what they're doing, and then you can build off of that. Because if it's similar stuff, like it doesn't necessarily have to be these same measures, but being able to implement something that maybe they are open to or trying to get them to do some of these things might make it easier. Because I do think that this is important, and following them and maybe trying to expand to other teams or something like that. Because I found that, when I was going around with the headbands and having the soccer players where I would have coaches from our opposing teams come up to me like in pregame or at halftime and be like, so tell me about these things. Can my kids wear them? Can I be a part of your study? And I'm like, I mean, if you want to hire all the video people and buy all the stuff and whatever, yes, I would love to have your data, but I can't be in two places at one time. And they're like, no, but this is so cool. I'd love to do it. So sometimes just once people get into it and see it, they're more interested and open
Once you
to
have
it.
that connection.
Yeah, I think that's what that happened for them, was like they connected like, oh, like this guy's
Brought it around.
made the connection for them. And they were like, wow.
It is important. So see, look at you, groundbreaker. Well done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
loved your dedication too. That was, and what you wrote in your thesis
Oh,
about your parents and
Yeah.
you know, inspirational. So
yeah.
I get that.
Any other questions, guys?
Nope.
All right, I'm gonna kick you to the GA office because I think you can hear the least out of the GA office.
Okay,
It's the one next to my office.
okay.
It won't be that long. Can I have the remote control,
Yes.
dude? Please,
Sorry.
thank you. No, you're good. I just can't stop recording from here, my mind.
Should I close this door?
That'd be great, thanks.